Well played, Aha. I must admit I was not familiar with your game. Here I was thinking you were just some cosmic troublemaker delighting in the twists and turns of life's journey, but no! You are the Lightbringer, the one who steals knowledge and shares it with the masses the way Prometheus shared fire with humanity. But really, I should have seen this coming. After all, Aha is the jester of the Aeons, and jesters channel their words and wit through the lens of humor to provide thoughtful commentary through parody, enlightening the unenlightened by drawing their attention to the things that matter most. And Aha is no different. They are sharing their knowledge of the world through witticisms and games. But enlightenment will only come to those who are paying attention. And I think the Phantasmoon games in particular hold the key to deciphering most, if not all, of Honkai Star Rail's world-building mysteries. From the true nature and role of the Aeons to the mysteries of path space, and so much more, wish power is the key to it all. But if I'm being honest with you, the only thing I'm really wishing for right now is a copy of Mortonac's Blade on my account. And thanks to Eniba, that wish may be granted soon. Eniba is a one-stop top-up shop that's sponsoring this video and my tendency to collect Dragon-affiliated characters, while also offering a nice selection of game keys, gift cards, VPN services, and Windows keys. And yeah, I know there's a lot of top-up shops out there, but while they only offer discounts on top-ups, Eniba offers cash back on all purchases, which I find to be a lot more useful because if I want to top up my Star Rail account, I get cash back, and I can put that cash back towards anything else in their shop. Whether it's a game key or top-up services for another game, doesn't matter. The cash back applies to everything. I also really appreciate how Eniba is dedicated to security and making sure their services are compliant with game developers like Hoyoverse, because this ensures that your account stays safe. And to top it all off, Eniba is very easy to use. Whether you want to top up your own accounts or send a gift to a friend, all you have to do is choose your top-up amount and enter the server region and UID of the account you want to top up on. Once the payment process is complete, your purchase will arrive in your account in minutes. Now, Mortonac's Blade doesn't come out for a couple more weeks, so I just picked up a Trailblaze pass for the daily reward. But if you're looking to snag a last-minute Evanescia, Eniba has some bundles where you can get everything you need in a single purchase. It's really handy. So if you're looking to top up, then give Eniba a try by clicking the link in the description. I've personally been very pleased with their services, and I think you will be too. A big thanks to Eniba for sponsoring this video, and now I think it's time we finally talk about why wish power is the key to understanding the universe. Only then will you also understand why Aha's name is spoken whenever one has an epiphany. I suppose you could say the goal is to give you an aha moment. To understand the secrets of the universe at large, we have to start by talking about the Phantasmoon games and the role that wish power plays within them. Now, the Phantasmoon games are actually really simple in concept. 8 participants don supplicant masks in order to generate wish power. The one who generates the most wish power wins and can become an Aeon for 1 minute. Now, I know this setup seems a little too basic to tell us anything useful about the universe at large, but it actually illustrates the process of how someone can ascend to Aeonhood for real. And the reason I'm confident making this claim is all because of wish power. To put it simply, wish power is what we call the power of attention. And while under the light of the Phantasmoon, the people of Plain Arcadia can use that attention to manifest their thoughts and feelings into reality as Imaginae. Now, initially we thought that wish power was unique to the Path of Elation since Imaginae can only maintain their forms under the Phantasmoon's light. But according to the new readable Preface on the Basic Studies of Wish Power, we now know that wish power is not a power of elation. It is the primum mobile, and it permeates the entire cosmos. The Imaginae of Plain Arcadia are just how the Path of Elation interacts with the primum mobile. Now, you might recognize the term primum mobile because it's credited as being the force that locks an Aeon to their respective path. And this is where things get really interesting. Because if wish power is the primum mobile and wish power is also the power of attention, then primum mobile is also the power of attention, which begs the question, how does attention lock an Aeon to a path? Well, it all boils down to Star Rail's take on quantum mechanics. See, in the real world, every aspect of reality is made of particles and energy. Particles representing a substance and energy representing the potential movement of those particles. This forms the basis of everything in existence. Now, particles are passive, meaning they don't really do much until they interact with an outside force, which, in the case of quantum mechanics, is the act of observation. I know it doesn't really feel like you're doing anything when you're looking at something, but in quantum mechanics, observation is technically an interaction with particles. So, by observing those particles, you set them in motion. And that motion is what we call energy, and the relationship between a particle and its energy determines how the particle behaves and what it becomes. So to put this another way, when you observe something, you give it a form. Therefore, observation shapes reality by setting particles in motion. Now, if you were the only observer, you would be the primary observer, or the primary person who sets particles in motion, which we could simply call the prime mover, aka the primum mobile. I think you kind of get the lore math now, right? The primum mobile is wish power, which is attention, which is also the act of observation. And observing things is how the mind shapes reality. Now, in Star Rail's case, particles and energy are kind of lumped together as a singular substance called imaginary energy, which, like its real-world counterparts, also makes up all of reality. The reason we call it imaginary energy likely has to do with Neoplatonic philosophers like Plotinus, who were the original pioneers of energy theory, for lack of a better term. Philosophers like Plotinus liked to argue that particles are passive forces, and so they required an active force like the human mind to grant them an image, or like a shape or form. That made the particles go from passive to active, and thus created energy, because energy means activity in Greek. I'm obviously paraphrasing and oversimplifying a little bit here, but I think you can kind of see how we get the imaginary connection here and why wish power can create imaginae. Imaginae are the products of thoughts being projected into reality. They're a literal manifestation of Star Rail's quantum physics, but obviously on a smaller scale since they're locked to plane Arcadia. But the phenomenon still persists outside of plane Arcadia, it's just functioning a little bit differently. While outside of plane Arcadia, you can't just draw something and observe it and expect it to come to life. You are still observing imaginary energy because imaginary energy makes up everything. And through your observations, you are technically shaping reality. And the greater your ability to observe, the more influence you have on the shape that reality takes. Now, Aeons have a primum mobile that binds them to their path, and paths are just massive swaths of imaginary energy, which means that an Aeon is simply an entity that observes imaginary energy, and all imaginary energy that is observed by that Aeon behaves according to that Aeon's will. It is a manifestation of their perception of reality. But do note that even if an Aeon stops observing and vanishes completely, as is the case with the Trailblaze, the energy within their path has already been set into motion, and it will continue to be in motion until all sentient life forms stop observing it, or until that imaginary energy is engulfed by another path, and thus observed by a different Aeon. And contextualizing things like this is huge, not just because it helps us understand the mechanics of Aeonhood, but also because we can use these mechanical understandings to greatly simplify Star Rail's cosmic structure. Because I don't know about you, but I've been having a really hard time sort of like imagining how all of these different worlds and planes of existence interact with each other. Like, we've got this really complex web of interdimensional realms like the memory zone and the dark zone and the horizon of existence and all sorts of stuff like that, and I don't know how they all interact with each other, at least I didn't until now. Because within the context of observation shaping reality, we can actually simplify the entire cosmology of Star Rail into two separate realms, and that's it. Everything either belongs to real space or path space. Now, real space is reality as we know it. It's the physical realm. But path space is a cognitive realm. It's a realm of concepts and philosophies, a realm of observation. And it's actually exactly what it says on the tin. It's a space full of paths. It's a realm where all paths of every Aeon manifest directly. So for example, the observer Fuli would have their path of remembrance manifest within path space as the memory zone, because the memory zone represents how Fuli sees reality. And you can make the same case for the Enigmata's dark zone and the Nihility's horizon of existence, just to name a few. And this kind of neutral path space that we've been to a few times must be the point at which all paths will converge eventually. And as a realm of observation, it should be the location where observers exist. So this is where you go to find an Aeon. And I say this because every direct interaction we've ever had or seen with an Aeon occurs within path space. Herta contacted Noose through path space, Phynon injured Nanook in path space, Cyrene saved Amphorius in path space, and the Trailblazer hops into path space whenever they interact directly with an Aeon, or sometimes just for funsies. So I think this heavily implies that Aeons have their own physical existence within path space. They may even live within their own paths, and if the paths are manifestations of the way they see the world, we might actually be able to make the argument that Aeons live in their own little worlds. And those little pockets of conceptualized reality reflect upon real space. And I think AHA kinda shows us this with how they've constructed Plane Arcadia, because it's also dualistic. So in this light, the world on canvas would be the world in concept, meaning it represents path space in the context of Plane Arcadia. And at the center of this canvas is the Phantasmoon Courtyard, which I think is representational of this default masterless path space that we go to all the time. And at the center of the Phantasmoon Courtyard is Evanesia's Panarch Elwood, which is a golden tree. And that perfectly mirrors the theoretical structure of the Honkai universe, which is theorized by Xandar to look like a tree made up entirely of imaginary energy. Hence why the imaginary element looks like a big golden tree. Now notice that around the Panarch Elwood are the supplicant masks, which I believe represent Aeons because Aeons are using wish power to win the war and become finality at the end of time, which is very similar to how supplicants are using wish power to win the Phantasmoon games to become AHA at the game's end. And notice how when they were falling to their death during the fight against Full Wish, the Trailblazer's mind ended up in the Phantasmoon Courtyard, and after conversing with the representative of the games, they got a power-up by channeling wish power through their Stellaron. It's eerily similar to other instances where the Trailblazer got the power of a new path by entering path space, like when they pulled the lance out of path space in Belobog and obtained the power of preservation. And just like supplicants need to gather wish power from the audience to increase their powers, Aeons need wish power from other sentient life forms in order to expand the influence of their paths. But as I suggested at the very beginning of this video, I also think Aeons need wish power in order to ascend to Aeonhood in the first place. And this is where things get a little bit tricky, so stick with me. In version 3.8, we witness Gopherwood's attempt to resurrect Enna the Order by coercing thousands and thousands of people to call for Enna's protection from the Swarm invasion. These collective wishes converged upon Sunday and the Stellaron, and had the plan succeeded, Sunday would have become Enna. And that means that regular people can create an Aeon just by wishing for one. In other words, wish power makes Aeons. Or perhaps we could argue that an Aeon is merely a representative of a collective. They represent a worldview, and through observation, impose it on reality. Now here's the thing. In order to become a supplicant, one has to first acquire a blank supplicant mask, and it's only after they don these masks that the masks transform and allow the supplicants to leverage the collective wish power of the audience. So the supplicant mask is kind of acting as a sort of convergence point for wish power, and I think Aeons also have this convergence point requirement. But it doesn't take the shape of a mask, it takes the shape of a Stellaron. Now before anyone says anything, yes, I know that Stellarons are the cancer of the harmony created by the conflict between Xipe and Selenova, and I'm not denying that. I mean, it's kind of hard to deny it when Selenova's name literally means new tumor in English and roaring star in Chinese. However, I would like you to forget about the origins of these Stellarons for a moment because those origins are far less important than what Stellarons actually do. See, Stellarons are a bit like paths because they are just bundles of imaginary energy that respond to wishes or wish power. But because they respond to anyone's wishes, we can confidently claim that they lack the influence of any singular Aeon's primum mobile or wish power. So Stellarons are kind of like fragments of unobserved paths. They lack a master. And that's why I want you to think of them as blank supplicant masks. Because it's only once an individual takes control of a Stellaron that they allegorically don their supplicant mask and become its master, controlling the wish power of the masses and channeling the imaginary energy within the Stellaron to do stuff. And we've seen this several times, most notably with Sunday and Cocolia. Now remember, whenever a new Aeon ascends, a new path opens alongside them, and that's because the path is the result of their observations of reality. So the way I see it, when the wish power of a world converges on a single person, it may cause imaginary energy to condense into something that resembles a stellaron. And that condensation of imaginary energy will eventually become the new path. So the combination of that stellaron-like thing and a master creates a focal point for the world's collective wish power, which in time turns them into an Aeon and a path. So while it's very possible, if not likely, that all the stellarons we've encountered could have all come from the conflict between Xipe and Selenova, what we know of as stellarons may only serve as a means to jumpstart this process. I'm definitely not going to speculate on Selenova's motivations for doing this today, but what I will say is that framing stellarons in this way makes their presence and influence on planets and the Silver Rail make a whole lot more sense. Stellarons are the representations of the will of the people and how those people and the eons they create wish to shape reality. And if a stellaron or something like it is required to become an Aeon, then we can finally explain why the Trailblazer needed to take one into their body in the first place. It's because Elio wants them to become finality. Their script is just the path the Trailblazer needs to take in order to become the focal point upon which the attention of all of the sentient lifeforms in the entire universe converges upon. So the Stellaron hunters may be hunting Stellarons in order to prevent anyone else from becoming an Aeon, because doing so would introduce new variables and that would mess with Elio's script. And that, my friends, is how AHA used the Phantasmoon games to tell us how the universe of Star Rail really works. And that's also all she wrote, and by she, I mean me, so I'm actually gonna skedaddle on out of here and let my lovely impatient channel enablers take center stage while the music plays. Thank you all so much for watching, remember to take care of yourselves, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!